tonight for our weekend event, Where Are They Now? A Higher Education Program Alumni Roundtable, coordinated by the Higher Education Program Alumni Council, or HEPAC. My name is Cass Ramsey. I'm the current president of HEPAC. We also have Dr. Susan Lounsbury from HEPAC representing the outreach committee who put this program together for today. We're thrilled you've joined us to hear from 4 of our talented and experienced alumni from the Higher Education and College Student Affairs graduate programs. The flow of the panel today will allow you to experience 4 of our Higher Education Program alumni stories. We have 5 initial questions they will address as a panel, and then we will move into an open Q&A session afterwards. Please feel free to use the chat interactively throughout the panelist intros and initial 5 questions. And then when we open up for Q&A, feel free to post questions for the panel in the chat. And myself or Susan can direct those questions to our moderator, Dr. Karen Paulson, at that time. And now for the exciting part, I will turn it over to our panel moderator, Dr. Karen Paulson, teaching professor and coordinator of online programs for the Higher Education and Educational Leadership Programs, to introduce herself and our panelists for tonight. Dr. Paulson.
Thank you so much, Cass. And thank you to everyone for joining us. We're excited to be sharing our stories with you. As Cass said, I'm a teaching professor here at Penn State. I got my doctorate in 1996, went away, worked for a long time at NCHEMS, came back, and now I coordinate the online part of the higher ed programs, the MED in higher ed, and the Ed Leader programs. So first, we're going to go around and do simple introductions. And in those introductions, the person will give, the graduate will give their graduation year, the type of degree that they got, and then what their current position is. So let's start with you, Stephanie.
You'd think by now I would know how to get off mute right away. But hi, my name is Stephanie Bjorklund. I am a PhD graduate from 2004.
And what's your current position?
Oh, my current position. Thank you. My current position, I am the Vice President and Executive Associate at Ranking Climate Consulting.
Perfect. Thank you. Jen Domagal Goldman.
Thanks, Karen, and thanks, Cass and others for organizing this today. Jen Domagal Goldman. I graduated my PhD in 2010 and am the Executive Director of the All-on-Campus Democracy Challenge, coming to you from just outside Washington, D.C.
Lovely. Jen Grossman Leopard.
Hi, everyone. And my name is Jen Grossman Leopard. I graduated from the College Student Affairs Master's Program in 2005, and then I graduated with my DED from the higher ed program in 2017 as a part-time student. And I'm currently serving as the Director of Student Life at James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia.
And finally, Kip Sorgan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kip Sorgan. I graduated from Penn State in 2011 with a PhD. I'm currently in my last year as an assistant professor of educational leadership at Georgia Southern. In August, I start as an associate professor with tenure at Georgia Southern. So yeah, my time at Penn State prepared me well for this job.
That's terrific. Congratulations. They're now going to share their Penn State higher education stories, and we're going to go in a slightly different order just to keep all of those of you participating on your toes. So Jen Domagal Goldman, would you please provide us with your Penn State higher ed story?
I'd be happy to. I started my doctoral program in the fall of 2004, and I picked Penn State, frankly, which at the time was, right in the #1 program in the country. But frankly, because my partner was in a PhD program in geosciences at Penn State, and I was friends. I was working down the road at Bucknell University. Knew I wanted to do a doctoral program at some point, so wanted to investigate the Penn State program, or otherwise needed to decide that I'd wait and do my graduate degree later. So came to campus, met with some faculty members who, Dr. Lisa Latuca, Dr. Bob Reason, who now are at other institutions, and knew I was making the right choice for me. And as somebody who really wanted to be able to do work really at the intersection of scholarship and practice, and have been able to do that since. Karen, is that enough of a story for right now, or do you want me to go with what?
I think that's a perfect story. Thank you.
Thanks.
Stephanie, what's your Penn State higher ed story?
Well, I knew that, so I was a social worker prior to coming back to graduate school. Well, I had my master's degree in counseling, and I was again, a social worker. And I knew in working with some women there that I wanted to get involved in higher education, because I was seeing how a lot of the women that I was working with were having difficulty making ends meet. You couldn't learn a living wage. And a few of my folks on my caseload were able to get into college, but it was very difficult for them to navigate that. And so I wanted to work in policy and ways that would positively affect people trying to, better their lives. So I looked into higher education because I thought that was a good avenue for that. And when I started looking at the different programs, I knew I wanted to move back east. I was out west at the time. And so I did a little circle, and Penn State, fortunately, was, I think, ranked the highest, #1 or something at the time. I got into a couple other schools, and then there was an interesting exchange. I arrived when Dr. Carol Kolbeck and Pat Teranzini and a bunch of other folks were here, and each of them, and Jim Fairweather actually too, very, very warm and welcoming, and really seemed like they wanted me to come to Penn State, where there was another school that shall be unnamed in the eastern part of Pennsylvania. And when I was talking with them, I'd gotten equal money from both institutions. And the one person said to me from the other school, well, if you wanted to come here, you'd know it. And then Trudy Haupt called me and said, hey, how about another $1,000? And I said, okay, I'm going to Penn State. So I had a great experience there.
Excellent. Thank you. Jen Grossman-Leopard, what's your Penn State higher ed story?
Well, mine is relatively long. Ultimately, I spent a total of 18 years affiliated with the institution. Right out of undergrad, I had the kind of typical student affairs interest in higher education, that I was the over-involved undergraduate student and had a bit of a life crisis my sophomore year when I realized that working with high schoolers was not meant for me. And it was my dean of students that helped turn on the light bulb for me to consider student affairs based on my involvement experiences. And so that's kind of the route that I pursued. And I kind of had a money motivation as well, a little bit, and that it came down to GW and Penn State, is that most of my family had since transitioned to the DC Baltimore area, and I was looking to get closer back to them. I was my undergraduate institution was in Ohio, and ultimately Penn State had offered me money, and GW hadn't made decisions yet, and I had to let Penn State know. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to Penn State. But that was also the time where like Bob Reason was had just arrived at Penn State, and it wasn't quite the college student affairs program yet. It became that program between my first and second years. So I got exposed to a lot of wonderful faculty there as a master's student. And then eventually when I started my doctoral work as well, and I ended up, due to personal reasons, my first professional role after my master's program was at Penn State Altoona. My partner and I ended up getting engaged while I was there and decided to live in the State College area. So that led me back to University Park professionally up until last August when I came to JMU. So I've had a lot of different experiences at Penn State in the higher ed realm, and have, I am who I am as a professional because of it.
Lovely. Thank you. Kip, what's your Penn State higher ed story?
So thanks, Karen. I was at Penn State from 2007 to 2011. I was working on my master's at NYU prior to that, and I was encouraged to look at the Penn State program. And so what I tell people is, when the best want to teach you, you don't turn them down. But the truth of the matter is Penn State was the only place I got into. So that's why I went to Penn State. I didn't have an assistantship. I just showed up. And the rest kind of was history. I got an assistantship by the second semester that I was there. And while I was there, I really challenged myself to learn statistics. I took 8 statistics courses while I was there, and they weren't easy courses. Some of them were pretty difficult, and I didn't get all A's while I was there, but it really wasn't about those grades. It was more about the content that I was learning and how to speak in a quantitative language. I knew that I wouldn't have an opportunity like this again in my life, with outstanding faculty in the higher ed program and in the educational psychology program. So I really did challenge myself, and it paid off for me. So after Penn State, I worked in institutional research and then in faculty development, and then I became a faculty member after that.
Great. So I wanted to just add a little bit, because we've gained time, which is unusual in one of these, is that my story is a little different. I came here in 1990, and that was before there were actual rankings of what was the #1 higher ed program and everything. And the only 3 programs I was telling them before we started were Michigan, Penn State, and UCLA. I was from Illinois and had gone to the University of Illinois. There was no way I was going to go to Michigan. There was no way I was going to move to California. So I applied to Penn State. That was the only place I applied, and they gave me an assistantship. So that's why I have a doctorate. So anyway, we're going to move to some of our more specific questions. Stephanie's going to take a stab at answering about her career path and how she got to where she is today. She told you a little bit about being a social worker and why she wanted to go on for her doctorate. Now she's going to tell you a little bit about what she's done since she got her doctorate.
Thanks, KP. So when I was at Penn State, I was fortunate enough to be on the Excel grant, which was a National Science Foundation sponsored grant through the National Academy of Engineering too. And we worked with several different institutions doing both qualitative and quantitative work. And I got to work with both KP and Susan Lounsbury on that, and it was very exciting at the time. But it really gave me the opportunity to become a researcher. And while I like engineering education, I think engineers are lovely people. I'm married to one, and they are well funded. I was not always wanting to stay in engineering education, but I was able to find some interesting parts of it. So I looked a lot at the time at sort of women and minority roles in engineering and engineering education. And through that assistantship, I was offered a postdoc at the National Academy of Engineering, where I headed up the Center for the Advancement of the Study for Engineering Education, and again worked doing wide range assessments through nationally. So we developed and coordinated, administered, and then analyzed the data from several different instruments over the course of a couple of years. And then I realized that I was missing sort of the social justice piece, which got me back to higher education. I wanted to get back to the social worker and the social justice aspect of it. So I had been contacted by Sue Rankin, who many of you might know. She was in college student personnel, and I began working with her at her consulting business, Rankin and Associates. And I've continued there for years now, and we do similar kinds of work, but in a different realm. So we do qualitative and quantitative research. We do focus groups and survey development and administration and analysis. And I sort of worked my way through almost every position that was there. And now am, a vice president and executive associate, so part of the leadership team. And as we're doing that, the greatest challenge we're having right now is that the company has been acquired by another company. And so in the efforts for Sue to be able to retire at some point, so we are now working with another company and really looking through the organizational development and how we're going to make that work and continue the good work of the company. So,
Exciting times, isn't it?
yeah.
Great to hear.
Mhm.
Okay, Kip, which career accomplishments are you most proud of?
That one was an easy one for me. It's when I hooded doctoral student. Absolutely. It's not about the publications or the presentations. It's about when I help somebody achieve their lifelong dream of earning a doctorate. That one certainly is an easy one for me. That's what I'm most proud of.
Thank you. That was quick. Jen Damagal Goldman, how did your degree prepare you for your career?
Such a good question, Karen. I think to answer that question, I guess I'll give you a little bit of a glimpse at part of my career. So I know I told you now I lead a project called the All on Campus Democracy Challenge. It's at a 501c3 called Civic Nation. We work with 900 colleges and universities across all 50 states, plus the District of Columbia, to really think about how to help campuses create democratic engagement cultures. So really thinking about voter participation, civic learning, political engagement. We work with Penn State, we work with JMU, we work with Georgia Southern, Kip, I'm pretty sure, although a little bit less. But before that, I got involved. That project was established in 2016. Before that, I worked at the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, right? And I started working with ASCU, as it's called, because in my first course at Penn State, in my first semester, my one elective that I chose to do was the public policy course that at the time was taught by Dr. Dana Mitra and Dr. Don Heller. And we had to pick a policy and do an analysis and interview someone about it. And Don will tell you to this day that he told me to talk to somebody at AAC&U, which sounds remarkably like ASCU, but I swear to you, he said the wrong one and just doesn't remember it. And I looked at the policy that was this unfounded mandate that came about in 2004 that was requiring colleges and universities to celebrate Constitution Day. And I went to DC and interviewed at the Starbucks in DuPont Circle, the woman who eventually came to have the position before me that I took over after graduating and moving to DC to find out why they had formed the American Democracy Project and what the American Democracy Project, which I went on to direct after finishing my doctorate, came to be. And so, I would say that first assignment, that interview, really starting to really understand what some of the higher education associations were doing and what kind of work they were doing and why. And realizing that all of the kind of civic and political engagement I had done on the side. Remember, this is fall of 2004 that I'm doing this course. So I had a lot of feelings about the election, was definitely like precinct captains with my eventually to be husband for some different things going on in State College. It really started to coalesce for me. So it became some of the work that I was doing. So I had an assistantship working, doing different, mostly qualitative research with Dr. Latuca while I was in my first 2 years, and then got the OSTAR fellowship and worked in the Office of Undergraduate Education because I knew I wanted to kind of go and do this work professionally. I wasn't necessarily interested in the tenure track faculty position that a lot of my peers wanted to do. And like Kip are doing very well. I wanted to really think about how we were applying this work. And I wanted to do faculty development. And I wanted to do something that, made me feel like we were implementing some of the best practices and the research we knew about how college affects students and how those students go on to become productive members of our communities and democracy. And that's what I did. So when I was working in the Office of Undergraduate Education, I helped with what was then called the Public Scholarship, the Laboratory for Public Scholarship and Democracy. I helped implement the first, Penn State applied for the first time to be part of the Carnegie Classification for Community Engagement. I helped with that. All of these different pieces that now have come kind of full force, background in terms of the work I do to help support institutions now. This morning I was at the U.S. Capitol in the Visitor Center, speaking to about 40 college presidents from Ohio about the work that they should be doing to help support students to be democratically engaged leading up to this election. So the whole thing, like I could just, it's kind of like, my husband works for NASA, and it's kind of like creating a constellation, right? Like I can like tell you, like it goes down from the minutia of a course assignment all the way, and it has kind of created the path that I continue to forge. And I wouldn't be the professional I am today without Penn State. So I'm deeply grateful not only to the program, but to literally many individuals here. I worked for Rankin and Associates. Stephanie, I don't know that we ever actually met in person, but I did a bunch of the editing and some other things when I was finishing my program. I got to teach with Sue in a first year course for undergraduate education majors. The whole Kip and I have, and Cass and I, and Jen and I, it's in the family. My sister did her master's in the College Student Affairs program, and then was supervised in her assistantship by Jen. It all comes, it all comes back around. So I just think this is probably going a little bit farther than you asked me to do, Karen, but take all the opportunities, check out all the different opportunities, take those extra stats classes. Although I definitely, for those of you who might remember, Bunny 1 and 2, and then was kind of done. And definitely spent a little more time on the qualitative research, but definitely am seriously the professional I am today because of my time at Penn State.
Excellent. Yes, it's definitely connect the dots and the network of people, because just looking at all the people on here, I know we cover probably 30, 40 years between us, all of us. Jen Grossman Leopard, what's one piece of advice, or potentially more than one piece of advice, you have for aspiring higher education professionals?
So my answer to this question comes from the student affairs kind of centered perspective, as that's been my whole professional kind of experience. And that, it's a pretty cliche, to be honest, but life-work balance is, I think, critical. And it's something that it goes back to my master's program at Penn State and Philip Burlingame, in my administrative class with him, of he just ingrained that in our head, that we needed to protect ourselves and our time. Except I don't think we listened all that well, because I think I'm part of the, for lack of a better term, generation of folks in student affairs that were okay with the being overworked and the more than 40, 50, 60 hour a week days, especially those of us that were working on the ground and doing programming, both during the day and for, evening, late night hours of being on campus until 1 o'clock in the morning and then being back in the office at 8 or 9 for the regular typical business hours. It's just not sustainable, and it's not working anymore. And I think we saw that pre-pandemic. I was seeing with graduate students and our newly entering professionals that they just weren't okay with it anymore. And they were going to say something about it, which I am grateful for, that they were they were standing up for themselves, and they were protecting their time and their mental health and their life, that they needed to have life outside of their professional kind of persona and work. And so with the pandemic, it's just exploded and exacerbated that they just really weren't willing to do more than what was typically expected. And that's continued as we're starting to return to fully in-person experiences. I won't say normal, because we aren't going back to normal. It's not what a thing anymore. And that's okay. I think that it proves that we need to be, that we need to be able to, for lack of better terms, as I think we're all sick of hearing the word pivot and flexible. But that's just kind of how things need to be now. And so I think as people in leadership roles need to be willing to change the structure of positions, change our expectations, be transparent with the folks that are interviewing for these jobs of what it is going to be, and stick to that. And be open to giving them agency to have a conversation of if this isn't working for me, if I'm feeling this is just too much, instead of waiting until them needing to leave and be like, hey, I'm this is my 2 weeks notice, giving them that space to be able to have those conversations, speak truth to power, that this isn't working. Can we change it? And be willing to change it so that those folks can still thrive in those jobs that they were initially really excited about. And I think it also goes to like the need to change for retention efforts, where we are in the midst of trying something new at JMU. We did a cohort hire across our division from 4 different departments. We kind of mirrored what our academic affairs colleagues have done at JMU and other institutions, where we had 9 positions as part of a single hiring process, so all at the coordinator level, with a similar DE&I thread, that there's some sort of DE&I specific work within the job description, so that it was a single hiring process. They were all on campus the same week together, some on the same week. I think at one point we may have had up to 5 candidates on campus in a single day. And so they were recruited together, they were hired together, and now they are all in place. And so they will work together, they will meet on a weekly basis, have larger picture conversations, but also kind of like granular conversations of how they will be able to collaborate through the DE&I space on a regular basis. And so hopefully they will come in with this cohort, know some folks on a more intimate level than maybe other colleagues, to hopefully kind of create more of that connection and belongingness at JMU right off the bat, and hopefully provide more of an opportunity to have a good balance of life and work. So hopefully you may see some articles or some presentations out there at some point soon about how we did in this experiment, but ultimately, I just think it's time that we really need to start we are beyond the time to start rethinking about how we structure our positions in student affairs and what our expectations are. And so my piece of advice is that as folks are interviewing for these jobs, have that at the forefront of the conversation. I have one of our candidates that we hired in student life through this cohort specifically told me like she appreciated my conversation with her about balance, and that will be a priority for me for these folks to be able to have those conversations with me at the director level, and have access to me that if it's not working, let's talk through it and work it out, in order to, again, keep them here and keep them happy.
Very exciting stuff, Jen. Thank you so much. Those lines of communication are really important. I'm not sure everyone knows, DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a very important aspect for all of higher education right now. And that's why there's a lot of focus on doing more work that way. We did have a question come in from who I believe is one of the audience members, who was asking, in staff roles, people who are working at an institution in a staff role, and they want to move up, but what if there's no clear route or path to follow? Panelists, I trust you all to give each other. Go ahead, Jen Grossman, Leopard.
I was dealing with that for several years. Within student activities at Penn State, which is my previous role, it was for a long time, it was very, very flat, and with nothing, nowhere near in sight, the opportunity to advance in the space that I wanted to advance. And after a while, there was some attention to that. And a couple of positions where I'd be able to create were created to allow for some more steps, which I recognize won't happen everywhere. But even as I was able to advance after 12 years-ish, it was really disheartening for a long time that I was at a place that I liked and I really was still passionate about and invested in, but I didn't feel the same. I didn't feel like I was being invested in. And so I went out and I did the work on my own to try to find additional opportunities to continue to grow and to push myself, and had to find those mentors and sponsors to be able to give me that opportunity, to put me in a space where I could be exposed to folks that I wouldn't ordinarily be able to be exposed to and to learn from. But to be honest, at one point, it was clear to me that if I wanted to continue to advance in the space that I wanted to, in the engagement and student life area, what I needed to look outside of Penn State And that was okay with me. Like I wanted to diversify my experience. I wanted to work with a different type of student in a different type of area, and get my kids to exposed to a different place after a while. So it was kind of a combination, and that was a decision for me that I realized I had hit a ceiling, and that ceiling was not going to crack really at all. So it was really that time for me to move on, which was good for me because I'm a creature of habit, and I get in a rut. And however, like what I do for the longest time, for most of my career, I worked with student organizations, and what I would always advise student leaders is like push the envelope, don't get in a rut, challenge us. And so I needed to do that for myself as well.
Thank you. Other panelists? Anybody have additional? Go ahead.
Karen.
No, go ahead.
Plus one, what you said, I think that same kind of piece is too often true in other organizations. So in the kind of higher ed association and nonprofit world that I have been working in largely since leaving Penn State, I would say the same is often true, that too often we don't recognize the talent we have on hand in ways that we can nurture growth into new positions, and instead often need to leave those institutions, organizations to move up, and then folks kind of realize, and that's not true universally, but I think it too often is. And I think too often we are underinvesting in kind of the professional development, particularly as we face budget cuts and other pieces. I think, I think that's very true. And I think, some of what you said, I would offer as advice for other folks of, you need to go and seek it out. You need to find ways to kind of fit it in if that's your goal. I mean, not everyone needs or wants to move up every time, and find ways and find other kind of mentors and folks. I remember when I left ASCU, I loved the work I was doing and wanted to keep doing kind of some of this national civic learning and engagement work. The organization and the position I was in, I was kind of clear there wasn't a next step, at least not in the way I wanted it to be. And I remember having coffee with a colleague at the organization I'm at now saying, like, I've been watching, I can't geographically go anywhere right now based on, my partner's position and things like that. But I, haven't found something even worth applying for yet. And she said to me, I'm about to post a position. Like, I was thinking of it at this lower level, but we have some funding. I could make it like this or this, and then see and whatever. And I had been on the advisory board for this, for the organization I lead now. And, but I, without that conversation, it would have been an assistant director position, and I wouldn't have taken it. I wouldn't have applied probably even, because I would have seen it as like moving kind of down. And instead it was made a more, I wasn't ED at first. I came over as kind of a managing director, but, but without that conversation of saying that's partly what I wanted to do, and without kind of looking for it and having those conversations. So, I think that's a piece of it too, but definitely Jen, totally on track there.
Kip, you had something to say.
Yeah, I'm going to build off what Jen Domerville-Goldman said. Sometimes it's not about necessarily moving up. Sometimes it's about moving sideways in order to move up. So the path for advancement isn't always linear. And moving up doesn't always mean in salary. If your life is not about finding the highest salary, if you want more flexibility or freedom in your life, you might have to take a salary cut to have more flexibility or freedom in your life. But it's about what you want out of your position in work.
Yeah. Stephanie, you want to weigh in on anything here?
I can agree with what Kip was just saying, because in my position, one of the reasons, other than the work, I like the work and the people that I work with, that I have been with American Climate so long, is because it has always been a virtual business. I mean, we visit campuses and we see our clients, but other than that, I've always had a home office, and that allows for great flexibility. I do parent as well, and I really appreciate the flexibility that not having to be in an office, so I can pop out during the day and come back and make sure that all aspects of my life are attended to. And it's been really one of best parts of working, the flexibility and the autonomy, I guess, really a lot of autonomy,
Yeah, yeah.
which
I think I might take a little bit of moderator prerogative and say something here, is that one of the things I've seen is that, because I do coordinate the MED, online MED program in higher ed, is that sometimes people are stuck and they're in staff positions and they come to get a master's degree, but then they're only offered other staff positions. I see this largely with women, and it's kind of being stuck in the pink collar ghetto of a university. And it kind of gets to both what everyone has said, is that you just need to sort of not agree to those things. You have to think you know that you've gotten a degree and you're ready to move out of those sorts of positions and keep at it, looking for it. The other thing, also based on what Jen Domicall Goldman said, was that when I worked at a private nonprofit in Boulder, my colleagues were always being offered jobs, being, headhunted. And I never was. And I finally said, I was like, what is going on? They're like, everybody thinks you're completely happy and you would never want to move. So no one wants to offer you. So you got to put, and this gets to the Boulder part of it, you got to put things out into the universe. You got to let people know, people you trust, that, hey, I think I've got all I could get here, and I'm looking for my next new challenge. So if you hear something, keep me in mind. Let me know what's going on. Because that really, that's how I got my job at Penn State, coming back to Penn State. So just know that. We do have a couple. Do we have any questions, Susan and Cass, that came from the participants?
We don't have any yet in the chat.
Well, not to worry. I have a stash of my own that you helped me with. So I think I'm going to move down to, because we have such a nice mix of people here. 2 questions. How, to the panelists, how did you decide to pursue a career in your sector? Because some of you have said you've stayed within the student affairs side. Some of you went faculty. Some of you are policy. Some of you are nonprofits. I've worked in both nonprofits, and now I am a non-tenure track faculty, which was a very clear choice of mine. So kind of how did you make those decisions for where you wanted to choose, size of institution, type of institution, things like that?
I'll jump in and just say that one of the reasons I feel like during my time at Penn State, I feel like I don't want to say we were groomed, but there seemed to be an underlying expectation that we would all become faculty members, and I certainly had a CV that said I could have done that, but I wanted to do something. I mean, I know working with students is a very important thing, but I wanted to do something where I could see the results of my work more immediately. Doing something like more of a publishing reports and giving information to clients and working with them to see the change, I think was something that I was really interested in. And so that's one of the ways that I appreciated that.
Thanks.
I think for me, it was to a large degree a story of geography. And so, my now husband has been funded by NASA for, since we were since we were an undergraduate, which is where we met together. And so now as a civil servant for NASA, predominantly at Goddard Space Flight Center, which is in Greenbelt, Maryland, outside DC, has also spent time at headquarters, which is near the National Mall. And so when we both finished, he finished a little bit before me, started before me, did a postdoc out in Seattle at the University of Washington, which is where I wrote my dissertation from. but we had kind of targeted Washington, D.C. as an area to look at because of the combination of NASA, as well as a number of higher education institutions, the higher ed associations, different nonprofits. And so that was a very kind of intentional joint choice. NASA has worked out. He's, the equivalent of a tenured department chair. And so, we now have a daughter and, deep roots here, but definitely has put parameters on what I am looking for, but also has not led me astray in the sense that I've been able to make choices. But I also didn't try to go tenure track, and I haven't tried to go up, a ladder in terms of positions at kind of a set of institutions. And so instead, I have made some of what Kip has said in terms of slightly lateral moves. And, when I came over to the All-In Challenge to start with, being second was amazing, right? It was like the perfect spot. I was no longer in charge. I didn't have to supervise. I wasn't responsible for anyone's financial well-being. My daughter was starting kindergarten at the time, which gave me the flexibility. We were in an office, but could be remote on days if we needed to. It was glorious. The previous ED became our chief operating officer at the nonprofit that we're housed at, and made a choice to kind of step into that role, being asked, and definitely have still adore it. Wasn't necessarily ready to take on all of the development and other pieces in a way that I wanted to, but we'll say I've risen to the occasion, I think. But I think, that's a piece of that story, right? Like, different people are geographically constrained in different ways. Some people aren't, there. And I think, I've always wanted to be working in the higher ed sector. I've done some of it kind of directly in the student affairs realm. Now I work in that great gray area. Like, I get to work with the institutions, and frankly, I only have to work with the ones who are really excited and want to do the civic engagement work. So I don't work with any of the kind of party poopers. Like, I get to work with all the ones who are excited to do the work, which kind of works out perfectly. And so, I think finding that right fit, and realizing that the fit then changes, and you have to find the new right fit, right? Which can be uncomfortable and challenging. But like, even Jen, hearing the leap from Penn State to JMU, like, you found that next right fit, and it makes me so excited for you. And anyway, that's.
Yep, I agree. Question came in the chat. I'll read it so you don't all have to go. Some of the panelists mentioned, that was Jen, like filling multiple positions at once, as well as budget limitations, which Dr. Trainer, who is participating, teaches our planning and resource management online. So he also knows about those budget limitations. As a current staff member, this person's saying and I believe it's Alexa Hodge, current staff member in student affairs, she's seen high turnover, 30 staff leaving in the last year, which I don't think is unusual, 10 faculty in the last 2 months, and only a fraction of positions being posted and filled. What's your perception of overall morale for higher education professionals? And she was spurred on by your comments about balance in life. I'd like to add to that the overall morale for higher education professionals, but also because during the pandemic, I saw a lot of people being furloughed or quitting or being or losing their jobs. And now I've got people who are the hiring has started again. So kind of, where do you think we are in sort of a kind of morale, hiring, kind of this whole big new jigsaw puzzle? Thoughts?
I would say morale is not great. And a lot of that has to do with the lack of, I think, belonging, both for students, but for staff as well. And I think, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately. So typically the focus is on students, which is what student affairs is here for, but we aren't focusing on our staff nearly enough. Right. So I think there's work to do there. But yeah, like, right, that's the great resignation, and they aren't coming back. Like, there are a ton of jobs out there. There were a ton of jobs that I had 5 coming to, when I started in JMU, I had 5 vacancies in my department coming in, with 1 resigned on my first day. And a lot of that, not much had to do with the institution. It was more specifically in the way the jobs were structured and the expectations. And I'm fortunate in that I have our vice president is relatively new, and he is very progressive and is willing to try new things. And he's done a lot of change really quickly. So things are happening at JMU, which is encouraging, which is what drew me here. Despite the fact I knew I was going to have to come in and hire a whole bunch of folks. And it's happening. It's a little slower than I think typically, but it's happening. But yeah, like when it comes, leads into this whole cohort hiring thing, when it comes to retention of staff and finding ways for people to connect right away, to try to address that morale issue. And so it's definitely what is trending right now, and that it needs a great deal of attention, I think. And that many people leaving I agree with Karen, is not unique.
I think places need to find ways to hold on to what they have. They've got some really good, effective people in positions now, and there are so many positions out there that are enticing, that the institutions really need to focus on how can we keep these good people here at our schools.
Yeah. One of my most recent MED graduates did her capstone paper on we know that student affairs professionals have a lot of emotional attacks and things like that, where they kind of reflect and see what's going on with students. Well, she's a financial aid administrator, and she was talking about just the heart-wrenching stories and the inability to help a lot of these students. And so she wrote her capstone paper on the need for mental health supports for not just student affairs folks in general, but financial aid administrators, which many people wouldn't think of as having those one-on-ones with students as much. And interesting, Alexa, as you said, the support staff. I have a doctoral student right now who's writing about the importance of staff to student belonging and being. So Jen, you were going to say something.
I just, I think, Kip, what you said at the end there went back to what kind of Jen said to begin with, right? Like part of the way we keep people is with some of that balance, is with some of that, those pieces. And so, I'm seeing kind of ties in what folks are saying. I will also just say, I think the Great Resignation hit higher ed a little bit later than some other industries, partly because I think institutions were were initially like paying very close attention to COVID and other things, and had opportunities for faculty to teach online, had opportunities for folks to work remotely. And so it felt a little bit safer and more flexible a little bit. And then it, pretty quickly has kind of tried to go back to kind of that normal, and that old normal is not working for everyone. But I have 2 junior staff who, one had 2 days in the office before we went fully remote, and one had 6 days in the office before we went fully remote. And it, not just junior in terms of position, but also, recent. In fact, one had just graduated 9 months prior from JMU, and in a small world kind of piece. And so, I think we've retained them, but there's definitely been, you have to find that organizational fit, and you have to figure out how to do your job. And I think all of those things have hit higher ed in a different way. And student affairs is, of course, facing the brunt of a lot of it. But I think as someone who works with institutions kind of across the spectrum, we're seeing it all over. We're seeing it in positions not being filled, in terms of faculty, in terms of a great deal of folks turning over. I think a lot of burnout. I think, a lot of mental health issues, not just with students. So definitely something we need to be paying a lot closer attention to, and definitely something that's been seen similarly in kind of some of the nonprofit and association space. Although I think luckily we've retained a little bit more of that flexibility, since we don't have a campus that we need to, be on to meet students kind of in person. And so I think that's been an asset for us, although I think the funding stream in terms of donors and other things has been problematic in other ways. So it's definitely, it's all of it, right? It's we've got a lot of work to do.
I think I want to move a little different from what we had planned, Cass. And see, we've got several people on who work in the field and who know about it. I just want to see if anybody has anything that they want to share, because there's a lot of wisdom there in addition to the panelists. Anything anybody wants to say or questions? This is a small enough group. Please just ask. Keep it nice. And Jim, you want to say something about that? You can actually take off your mute and say something, but keep it short. No.
So you know me too well, KP. Yeah, no, as I said in the note, we're struggling to hire people. And, we're now actually struggling to hire people to help us hire people.
Let them know where you are, Jim.
I'm at Villanova University in suburban Philadelphia, and we're a fairly well-regarded institution right on the I-95 corridor in a nice location, and it's still outside a major city, and it's still difficult, and we've really had to kind of shift into more of a recruitment mode, and in turn you have HR looking to hire recruiters, as opposed to you used to process applications, right?
Yeah.
So that's a very different posture for us.
Yeah. Thanks.
I've been experiencing that when 2 of our vacancies are Fraternity 3 Life coordinators, and I probably cumulatively sent over 600 emails to institutions across the United States, and ultimately we got 4 candidates for each position.
Wow.
It's just so bizarre.
Yeah. Yeah. Other participants want to say anything? Thoughts, comments, opinions? Cass and Susan?
I was going to say, I don't, I'm just going to jump in and ask. So not to put anybody on the spot, but I'm just curious about some folks who are participating today. What caught your attention? What brought you to our session? And if you feel like it, share a little bit about your connection to Penn State.
Go ahead, Alexa.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I have a 9-month-old daughter, and she's on my lap and on my phone. And you guys are all just lucky that she is not screaming at the moment. So anyway, I won't turn my camera on, but I did graduate from Penn State College of Ed twice. I have a bachelor's in rehab and human services, and then I have a master's in counselor ed. I decided to attend this session just because maybe, as you may have guessed, based on my comment, and also the question that I did pose about the pathways, the routes from staff to, higher level. I feel I'm in higher ed now. I'm in student affairs, but I kind of feel like I'm struggling in it. I love what I do. I love supporting students. I get great feedback from students. The program that I run, my students love, but I just kind of like, I think Jen was saying, I don't feel that love from Penn State so much, right? In terms of opportunities for growth, in terms of compensation. And I think may have been Kip who said, sometimes you have to take a pay cut to achieve that balance. And I did take a pay cut to be at Penn State. And now I almost feel like that wasn't a great idea because I don't see a pathway for me. So I wanted to come to this session just to kind of see how folks got to where they were and just kind of try to gather some thoughts and some encouragement, I guess, really. And I needed it today. I talked to my supervisor about applying for a position that's like, it's a DSA position. And she essentially told me, no, don't do it, that you're not going to be considered. You don't have enough experience, so it's just like,
with a master's degree, you don't have enough experience?
that they quote, change the level, and now they're doing preference for PhD and they want people with athletics experience, which I don't have. And, you know, I'll be supervising people. So anyway, long story short, I really came to this session just to kind of be inspired and seek some thoughts about how maybe I can transition. It is hard because I do have a family, and we did relocate from Maryland to Pennsylvania for me to come back to Penn State. And I can't wrap my head around forcing my family to relocate again.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. That's me. A lot.
I feel you. That's good luck with that, because, and if you want to come over and talk, I'm in Rackley, so we can chat about things or chat on Zoom. I'm on Zoom a lot. So.
And remember, that was one person's opinion of what you should do. So
Yes.
if you want to aim high, aim high.
You go, Kip.
Thank you so much, Kip. I actually have a colleague and my former supervisor who told me, do not listen to this person at all. Like, they do not understand your value, and that's their issue, but that I shouldn't hold that as, you know, truth.
We're getting into the home stretch and we have a hand up, Minru.
Hello. Hi,
Hello.
everyone. My name is Min Ray. I graduated from Penn State in 2019 with a Bachelor of Communication and minor in business. So I'm here today because I face a little bit issue of extending my career based on my education right now, which is in Master of Education in Advanced Teaching. So after Penn State, I went to a route of pursuing Master of Community Arts in Maryland Institute College of Art, but I just didn't like the environment and the courses that was not located on campus, which drew me away from loving that school. So pandemic hits in 2020, and I just heard from a friend that there is a online school hosting for Master of Education, and basically everything is online, but the office of that school is in Pasadena, California, and the school is called University of the People. And from that time, I have been attending courses, 2 at a time, tri-semester until now. So I have been facing a lot of difficulties of applying jobs in the realm of education, because I was an international student from China and I didn't have any work visa or anything to apply for off-campus job. So
Right.
my working experience has been always in, a hub or the student dining hall, like one of the student dorm, right? And because without those experiences in the area I'm studying to, I got rejected a lot for these job opportunities. And right now I'm in the I'm working at Casino Maryland Live. I think I'm more of using my bachelor's degree of communication to apply for my jobs. And that kind of disencouraged me of continuing my Master of Education, because what I see myself is I'm working as a special event rep at the casino, where I mostly use my service experience like before. And more or less, I'm still wanting to teach, but it just doesn't open to me like the chances I see on the internet.
If you want to send me an email, we can set up a time to Zoom. I can talk to you about, because I can give you some ideas. So feel free to follow up with me. I see that Sue also has a question or wants to say something. Sue Thorpe. Yes, ma'am. We've got 2 minutes.
I'll be really fast. I just think another source of people for you to be looking at to hire would be retired teachers. Because in all university communities, there are many educators who have retired for a variety of reasons, but might have part-time jobs or ways that they could be supportive from the wisdom that they've had in teaching and being administrators in different levels of education.
I would love, but let me tell you what's going on here at Penn State. The new HR system, we can't hire anyone who gets their retirement through PSERS, which means a lot of people who worked at Penn State and didn't go TIAA CREF, and everyone who was a K-12 teacher. So I have trouble finding adjuncts, which I thought I could just get retired teachers to teach a lot of my online, and I can't because of the HR system and the current setup with PSERS. But in other states, it's a
Yeah,
great.
I just
It's
think,
super
I mean,
right.
like I taught in another state.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's still a lot of, even if it's volunteer or assist or whatever it may be, supporting the teachers
Yep.
you have. If you have, for example, I would be happy to come in and help in different
Excellent.
ways. I'm in the university, the State College area, but I think there might be other educators here who've retired.
Yeah.
Who would be happy to help in various volunteer capacities.
That's a good idea. Thank you, Sue.
You're welcome.
Thank you everyone for coming. Cass, do you want to have last say, or just, we are. Enjoy your We Are weekend. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you, panelists, for giving us the insight into how you got to where you got to, and Cass and Susan for putting this together. Appreciate you all so much. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.